Awesome. Thank you. So thank you so much for having us. So today we're really going to talk about behavior management. So kind of just really what to expect is we kind of want to cover on the functions of the behavior. So really the why, the strategies to implement behavior before it occurs, and then some strategies to implement during or after a behavior. So we're going to start off with the functions of behavior. So the function of the behavior, so kind of the why, right? The big question, why the behavior is occurring. So all behavior has a function and is used as a form of communication, especially the disruptive ones. Often students engage in these behaviors because they have not developed or learned the skills to help access their needs, and being able to determine the function of the behavior. The why will help determine the strategies that can be used to decrease the behavior and teach replacement behaviors. So when we kind of look at functions, right, usually we look at 4 functions, but currently right now in the current situation, the students we really look at 2 functions, right? So we're really looking at the behaviors are occurring for 2 reasons: to either get something, right? So we're looking at our students are trying to gain access to items, attention, toys, help. This can be sensory, something that is more interesting than what they're currently doing. And then they also engage in the behaviors to avoid or escape something. So this can be work, it can be being corrected or prompted if they're being embarrassed, attention, boredom as well. And kind of down here, just the functions that we always look at are kind of the attention, the access, or escape. It's not always a simple fix, right? Behavior can be very complicated. Behavior can happen for multiple reasons, right? It can happen also across multiple functions. Behavior that is ongoing cannot be easy fix and may take weeks of consistency to see the change in the behavior. We also look at reinforcement history can be a really big thing. So when we're looking at potentially some of our high school students, we might be really competing with past reinforcement history that takes quite a bit longer to kind of decrease those behaviors. Behavior changes require consistency with the plans that are in place. So meaning expectations should be very clear and the student should know what is expected of them.
And I just want to add on that part too. Again, if we're not clear on our expectations, students, they start making them up themselves. Right, Becca?
Yep, exactly. So we want to make sure that anytime we're kind of interacting with these students, we have that real clear expectation so they know exactly what's expected of them in their kind of day-to-day life in school. So environment impacts our behavior as well. So behavior is very influenced by the environments that we're in. Being able to change environment will help decrease or change the behavior being displayed. So many behaviors may actually be caused due to setting events that may not be as clear to us. So this can be maybe the student hasn't had anything to eat and they're very hungry, right? Or they didn't come to school and they're very hungry, or maybe they didn't get a lot of sleep last night. The weather change, potentially the classroom is too loud. It can also be if a fire drill happens, safety drills, if there's a sub in the classroom. So some of those kind of unexpected changes can also impact our behaviors greatly. I always like to say, kind of think of our own selves, right? Maybe if we didn't get coffee, we may not be, as awake as usual. Or so these are as well with our students and their behaviors. So I kind of just wanted to lay out kind of an example as well. So the example is a student in the middle of doing a math worksheet at his desk while the other students are engaged in their own work. He looks up to see that the teacher is attending to another student and he immediately screams and yells while throwing his paper to the ground and throwing the pencil in the direction of the teacher. So in this, we're looking at what was the behavior, right? Go ahead, Dina, you can click one more time. Right, so we're looking at in this scenario, right, the screaming, the yelling, the throwing his paper on the ground, throwing the pencil toward the teacher are really the behaviors that we saw in this scenario. And when we look at this, we're looking at what is the function, right? It's attention, right? He's throwing it towards someone I guess I could have also added, it could also be escape, right? So this can be a multiple function kind of scenario as well. Now we're going to go over just some proactive strategies. When we think of proactive strategies, we're looking at some strategies that can be used before the behavior occurs. So I've listed some proactive strategies kind of just for the elementary school kind of setting. We're looking at potentially using timers before transitions is always a big one. You know, it could be, all right, we have 5 more minutes before we need to go back to class. Again, looking at clear expectations by using visual schedules usually help, using first then statements, providing choices, providing statements versus questions. So instead of saying, do you want to go back to class? We can provide statements of like, we're going back to class. Structure kind of at a high rate. So really ensuring that our structures are very across the board, very just high in general, and we have a structure in place. Potentially having a time away or space that our students can go to kind of calm down and kind of recollect their thoughts. Visuals, as well as providing praises throughout the class time. These strategies will be can be the same for any age, but the presentation of these strategies may be different based on those students. And just some proactive strategies that can be used in the high school setting. Again, I think timers are always a good one. You know, we use timers all the time. It could be a very general time warnings for them. Again, back to those clear expectations by using a visual schedule, providing those first then statements. Okay, first, you know, you need to finish your work, then you can have some access to your phone potentially, providing those choices. Again, some statements, questions, time away space, visuals, and, you know, providing praise throughout the class time.
Becca, do you have like a resource for the statements versus questions, something that I can maybe add to my recap notes for everybody that they can have?
I don't have a resource off the top of my hand, unless potentially Carrie might know of one, but I can see if we can create something that might be a little bit easier. I think the statements versus questions are always a little bit easier. I always like to give the example, you know, if you're asking a student, do you want to do this? And they tell you no, you know, we kind of have to honor those. But if you provide it more of as a statement versus that question, you might get a little bit more success because there is that kind of demand provided.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just some key points to remember about these proactive strategies. They may not work for each student. Every student's different. We need to make sure that we are adjusting and modifying per each student, as well as making sure that it's individualized per students. You know, sometimes providing choices may work for one student, but it may not work for another student. So making sure that, you know, we're looking at the kind of the needs of that student and what works best for them at that time. Okay, I'm going to hand it over. We'll have Alexis jump on and go over responding to challenging behaviors.
Sorry. Hi, team. My name is Alexis. I'll go ahead and be covering the section responding to challenging behaviors. So we all face with challenging behaviors throughout the day, you know. What are we supposed to do when we are facing some of these challenging behaviors? The first thing we want to do is make sure you remain calm. If you don't remain calm, they're gonna expect you to react a specific way, and that's what's reinforcing that behavior. We also want to make sure that we redirect, minimize attention, minimize access, and follow through. So just remember the function of what the function is and why the behavior is occurring. The response to the behavior will change depending on the function. So some of the things, for example, if they want attention, you got to remain calm. Any gesture or face expression that you'll make can be reinforcing to the student. It doesn't have to be verbal attention or you telling like, hey, stop, don't do this, go sit down. It can also be nonverbal attention. You know, maybe looking at them, making simple eye contact can make that behavior reinforcing. So a little bit more with remaining calm, continue to use a neutral tone of voice, avoid yelling, avoid using what they might consider a disrespectful tone of voice. So always try to be respectful to the student. Ensure that your body language is positive and you are not crossing your eyes or rolling your eyes. One of the things too that we might tend to do is laugh at the things that the students may be saying or doing. And it is hard to hold that in. Try your best to not laugh at whatever is going on as well. Sorry, Jenny, can you go ahead to the next couple slides? For redirection, you always want to make sure that you prompt the alternative behavior that's more appropriate. Provide immediate feedback and reinforce that alternative behavior. Later throughout the presentation, I'll go ahead and review some examples on how to redirect or provide this reinforcement to the behavior. Like I mentioned, you want to make sure you reduce attention. Do not engage in eye contact. Some of the strategies that we may be using that we refer to are planned ignoring. It's not necessarily completely ignoring the behavior, but kind of redirecting your behavior, but kind of eavesdropping to what's going on and making sure that you're there to prevent any other risk behaviors or any, what's the term I want to use? Any other students get hurt or other staff get hurt or in the way. So make sure you don't vocally address the current behavior and stuff like that. Now, like I mentioned, if it's a behavior that's occurring for access to a tangible, you want to make sure you remove the items in the area and deny access for a limited period of time. Once the behavior has reduced or the student has returned back to baseline, you can give the item back, but you want to make sure that these reinforcing items are not available or not offered during this time. The next thing that we have here is follow through. Now, this is one of the important things that is hard for us to kind of go through, is you want to make sure you follow through what you had proposed or what you intend to do to utilize these strategies. If we don't follow through, we're not going to find or see the results or effectiveness of these strategies that we have. Even though it's a simple strategy, it can take you a long way. So you can kind of pick and choose what path you want to go, and you always want to follow through with what you start. If you're provided a task, then ensure that you follow through with that simple task. If the student is having a behavior and the task may be too difficult, you don't want the student to allow to be avoiding or escape the task. You want to make sure that they complete at least a portion of the task, maybe 2 to 3 math problems, and instead of doing the whole 10 problems in the worksheet, you follow through, but they know that they're still not going to get away with the behavior that they did. So consistency is key. Even though they completed a portion of the activity, you always want to provide that social praise statement for any portion of the task that they completed. And then after that, after you follow through, the student has remained calm. You want to make sure you debrief after the behavior has happened and discuss what had happened, what could have done be done differently, and maybe you can also self-reflect on how you responded to the behavior. It's also always important to kind of evaluate yourself. Did I do this right? Did I do this wrong? Could have I responded a different way so I wouldn't have to reinforce that behavior?
Alexis, can I ask a question
go
real
ahead.
quick? So I'm thinking as an admin point of view of we want to reflect and have those conversations with them, but sometimes when if our students are just like really irate, and if it does end up being like a suspension kind of situation, when they return, it's still okay to have those conversations, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Right.
All right. 2. All right. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to teaching replacement behaviors. And I'm going to go ahead and have Lindsay cover this piece.
Hi, guys. Okay, so this is kind of one of my, I like this section, teaching replacement behaviors. So as we talked about, right, we're all trying to understand why someone is doing something. Why are the students acting out? Why are the students doing all that? Why are we all frustrated because of what they're doing? So not only understanding and trying to figure out why they are doing it, but also looking at those replacement behaviors, right? Because that's what we want. We want them to do something else instead of the disruptive behavior, whatever it may be, right? So teaching these replacement behaviors is teaching the student to engage in something else, right? So my little tiny picture over there, the little kid says, so let me get this straight. I don't have to cry and yell to get my cookie, right? That you want them to ask. So teaching them to ask for a break, teaching them to communicate better is what we want to see. If they engage in the behavior, then they should get reinforced for that. And so we want them to always have that communication with us. And sometimes that means, though, that those kids may not have that communication skills. That's why they're engaging in those behaviors, those challenging behaviors. But it is something that we need to teach along the way. That's going to be critical. We can't just have them stop the behavior and that's it. They need to learn other stuff, instead. So if we go to the next slide, some of the other things to kind of remember is to avoid those power struggles, right, in teaching some of that stuff. So rather than telling a student they can't do something or just telling them no, we want to look at, in that moment, what can we then prompt instead? What can we prompt as a communication skill for that? So an example potentially could be if the student keeps leaning in the chair, offer alternative ways to sit, right? You have those like movement chairs. They could sit on the floor. They have those like wiggle seats or those little cushions that they can sit on. Some other examples, use your phone during a break between classes, but not during instruction time. So allowing them the opportunity to still get what they want, but limiting it to certain times of the day, things like that. You can stay after school to finish your work if you're having trouble trying to get help if it's not being done in class. Also, taking a break, walking around the classroom if they're restless. And again, that communication to the teacher, like, hey, I need a break, or understanding for that particular child that that's available to them. Something else is expressing opinions during the class discussions, but having them wait for everyone else to talk as well, including the teacher or whoever that might be. And lastly, looking at, like, you can choose a different activity if you're not interested in this one, like giving those choices as an opportunity for them to continue to be on task, different ways to complete the activity. But again, kind of what you see in all of these is that communication piece that you're trying to teach the child. And whatever form that might be, right? It might be an actual vocal expression of it, asking for the break, anything like that, but it could be use of text, other communication devices. So giving the child the opportunity to express themselves instead of the behavior that we don't want to see. Okay, so last we kind of have some key tips along the way of looking at all of this stuff. And that's always to maintain safety. So if the kiddo is engaging in some of that aggression, right, safety first, even though we want to teach all sorts of stuff like replacement behaviors, we always want to find the function of what they're doing. But in that moment, you always want to maintain safety for the sake of everybody involved. Understanding yourself as well is pretty key in some of this stuff. So understanding, like, if you or the teacher, you see that sense of frustration in trying to handle the situation, sometimes there's a need to tag somebody out. Like, I need a break, I can't do this anymore. I need Becca to come in and help me out, or Alexis, I can't, I've been doing this all morning. I need you to kind of come in and have a fresh start with the kiddo. And potentially then he can come in or she can come in and prompt some of those replacement behaviors or do things like that. Making sure to be consistent in what the plan of action is, anything like that. I always say that consistency is key. Even if you have the wrong plan or anything like that, consistency is key, because then you can figure out what else to do instead, as long as you know that everybody's on the same page. Another key point is to communicate not only with the kid, teaching the kid communication, but also communication with others, and whoever's on your team is critical. And don't take it personal. Love this one myself. The kiddo that is hitting you, the kiddo that is cussing you out, the kiddo that's making the classroom a mess. It's not you. You have to remember not to take it personal. It's not because of what you did to them. They just have not found a way to communicate, to express themselves, things like that. And that's why they're acting out. Right? Understanding, circling back to that function. But it's not you, right? It's the skill that they don't have. And so trying to put that out at the end of the day is that, they didn't do it because of you. It's just that they're what they need to learn. Taking one behavior at a time is also kind of the thing, right? You're just there in the moment. They're in the moment to kind of figure out what's happening right then and there. They've thrown the thing, whatever it is, they're trying to punch you. You're looking at that instance in that moment and trying to work with it, and then you're going to move on, right? Kind of looking at sequentially, and that's how we find function, right? Sequentially later, you're going to look at all those, but in the moment you need to take a deep breath and kind of figure that stuff out. And getting to know your students and their triggers is also kind of that thing. Is what I was mentioning is that in the moment you're looking at that behavior and trying to figure it out, but also over time, there's a pattern to it. There's a pattern to them. There's a pattern to their behaviors. Making sure, which ties into the next one, right, is all that positive interaction with all the kids, the rapport building, the way that you're able to seek their attention. They're able to seek your attention. You have that connection, which is going to assist you later in supporting them in their learning, reduction of their behaviors, and everything else involved. That was kind of our end. We'll give it back to Becca if she has anything else to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to kind of end it, and this was, we're talking about the functions and the behaviors, and I think it's always important to know that you guys, at your guys' sites and schools, you have a ton of resources that you can go out to and seek, the psychologists, the counselors, and I think those are always great resources if you guys have help with certain behaviors that come up. But
Thank you guys so much. A point that you brought out is, one thing might work with one student, but it doesn't work with all students. And to be flexible with that and just kind of seeing how that's going to work from student to student. Also, I know a lot of these things you were all referring to a lot of teachers, and a big majority of our audience today is administrators, but also learning this as administrators to model for teachers, especially some that are maybe struggling, or your newer teachers, or even veteran teachers that are struggling with some very strong-willed students. These are some strategies that we can use and share with them also. And then again, for administrators, you guys do have your strong-willed that come in day after day, and to be able to, I see Robin laughing right now at me, the same ones that come in day after day. And yes, and you become very aware of their patterns. And so these are some things that you guys can use, and hopefully to make your days go a little bit smoother and really get to the issue. I like how you guys were saying, don't take things personal, and it's hard because we are reactive. We're in that moment, right? And we do take it personal. And I always say, when you go home for the day, you are going to be thinking about that, but I guarantee you those kids are not thinking about what had happened at that moment with you. So, and every day is a fresh day. The student has a fresh start every day. Any questions for